Oh, yes, yes. Hello, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. My name is MC Till of Everybody's Hip Hop label in the Boom Bap Chat, also co-author of the Boom Bap Review. Tonight on the Boom Bap Chat, we have Educators Night. But before we get into our guests in the conversation, you know the drill. If you're in Cincinnati, please make it on over to Pleasant Ridge and check out Everybody's Records. They're a mom and pop record store, one of the first in Cincinnati, owned and started by a female entrepreneur, which is super dope. And they've been supporting the hip hop community for as long as I've been here. And so we'd like to get back to them. So check them out. If you can't get here, you can go to everybody'srecords.com and buy some stuff online. They got records, tapes, books. They also have books. Speaking of books, this joint right here, this is the Boom Bap Review Volume 3. And one of our guests
Yeah.
tonight is in this sucker, pretty high up on the list. So we'll talk about that in a minute. But check this out. If you don't have your copy, you can go to boombapreview.com and pick it up today. All right, tonight, this is Educators Night, talking about the intersection of hip hop and academia. And in the room, as always, my man, Iomas Mirage with us. What's up, Iomas?
What up, brother Till? How you feeling, bro?
Man, I'm feeling great, man.
All
I'm
right,
excited for
all
this
right.
conversation. This is
Yeah,
a
me too.
great conversation. Also in
Absolutely.
the room tonight, we have Breeze Bruin of the Juggernaut fame. Breeze Bruin, what's up, man? How are you tonight?
I'm good, man. You hit me up, was like, we're gonna talk about education. I was like, all right, let me try to get in there.
Right on, man.
So I'm just happy to be here, and thanks for inviting me.
No doubt, man. I know your time is limited tonight, so thank you for giving us a few minutes to hang out and chat with us. So really appreciate it. Also in the room, I'm gonna let Iomas introduce our other esteemed guest tonight. Go ahead, Iomas.
No doubt. This is my sister Francesca D'Amico Cuthbert. She is a doc. She has her doctorate in hip hop history. Well, actually, African American history with a focus on hip hop history. So I got that right. Did I say that
You got
right?
it right. You got
All
it
right,
right.
no doubt, no doubt. And she's also working on creating the timeline for hip hop in specifically in Toronto from start to present. You know what I mean? So my sister Francesca is in the place to be. So salute. Glad to have her here tonight
Thank
for
you.
sure.
Glad to be
No
here.
doubt,
It's a
no
privilege.
doubt.
Right on. So, Breeze, you said something. You said, you heard we were doing this hip hop night about education, and you're like, yo, I got to be there. Why is hip hop, this conversation about hip hop and education important to you?
That's a great
I,
question.
I just know that it's been just really intertwined in my development. I don't know if that's because of the particular age I am and the timing of it. Um, from middle school, it was just it was just like so interwoven. Um, I remember even before that. I remember going to school, and when the rapping Duke was popping, I was in grammar school, and it was like everybody memorized this whole song, and it was like, when I think about it, that's really impressive. We were like,
Hmm.
I don't know, 6, 8 years old, and we knew this whole song front to bottom, and it was an activity. It was a practice. So when I think about that, from there it became me trying to write rhymes, and the first place you perform is in school, whether it's the lunch table, or it's the schoolyard, or it's the bleachers. But that was like really, it was just so hand in hand,
Hmm.
and I felt so grateful, and I still do. Um, but I'm not going to front. I'm a little bit I'm more than a little bit concerned, because the idea of what hip hop is so diverse at this point.
Hmm.
And when I think about like my kids, and I think about the music that matters to them, I mean, I'm not gonna front. A lot of times I don't like what they like. I'm gonna keep it a
Yes.
buck. So I mean, I've been teaching 18 years, and it used to be such a source of common ground
Mm.
that I could have with the kids. But as it's gotten splintered, um, with just so many different genres, I see myself being frustrated now, and I got to be careful not to be, the get off my lawn dude, because I do know that there's power, and
Yeah.
I just know that there's um I got to be open to what they're listening to,
Yeah.
um because it was edutainment for us. It really was,
Yeah.
and I think it is for some of them. They know what I like, so they'll be like, "Hey, you should check this out." Because I'll be like, "Don't play me that trash," you know what I mean? But but they put me on. Like they'll actually put me on to certain artists, and I love it. I like really appreciate when I hear something where I'm like, yeah, like I should know about this, and I in turn try to do the same for them. Not only just older stuff, newer stuff too.
Yeah.
So it's a meeting place, in certain respects, and then in other respects, it feels like there's like a line in the sand. Like I can't get with, you know, I can't do drill music. I really can't.
Mm.
I've tried, but in my mind, I'm like, yo, y'all are just, you guys are just banging out to death. It sounds like death to me.
Yeah.
I just can't really rock with it.
Yeah.
And I'm
Facts.
trying to change my lens to be like, well, you know what? There's like a chant vibe to it. Um, I'm looking for good things with it,
Yeah.
but it's like I just find it very difficult. Um, I'm reaching.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then it's
Well,
like let's go, let's find this common ground. And I feel like there's less and less of this, as so much of that more negative stuff is taking center stage. So as an educator, it's like I've always interwoven it into my lessons. And for better or for worse, I've gotten in trouble with administration for certain lessons. Um, but I'm not gonna stop. I'm still gonna try to utilize it, because I feel like it's just a wealth of content, and it has everything that I would have in some of my regular old white man content. It has
right.
entendre, it has meter, uh, it has conflict, it has symbolism, it has imagery, it has all of that.
Yeah.
So I feel I'd be remiss as an educator to not effort to put that in front of them.
Right. What grades do you teach, and what do you teach?
I teach 12th graders.
12th grade.
So
Okay.
I consider myself lucky, because they're on the cusp of adulthood. A lot of them are doing adult things, and sometimes those conversations lets them know, like, oh, this guy right here, I can have a real conversation with him.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, you can, you really can. And so sometimes hip hop is kind of that olive branch.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can
Yeah.
you? Oh, go ahead. Go ahead,
No,
too.
you're good,
Go ahead.
Isle. Go ahead,
No,
man.
I just wanted to expound because I remember having a conversation with Dr. David Stovall, who's a professor at UIC, and he was saying that when teachers think outside of the box and they like really get students to be engaged, that always comes up where they get in trouble with administration. So can you like kind of like expound on that? Like, from your perspective, like why is that? Like why is it you would think that administration, but I know administration is kind of always in conflict with educators who do like innovative things, because I feel like education is a tricky space where they want students to assimilate or not imagine or be creative in the classroom. But if you have an educator that's promoting that, it seems like that the administration doesn't like that, and then the teacher becomes a target, and then oftentimes that teacher could be released or the contract not be renewed or things like that. Like, yeah, I just wanted to hear like some of your experiences on that, if you want to share. If you want to share that.
Honestly, I, I'm not as scared as I used to be because I'm tenured.
Oh, okay,
so,
okay, okay, okay.
so I mean, no, they'd have to walk in to me, playing like the first NWA album. You know what I mean? The dirty version. You know what I mean? Like with videos of, like ridiculous, just like gratuitous violence in the background, which would never happen. But my point is that a lot of us seasoned educators, we can take chances. So
Right.
it's
Okay.
like I want to tell a new teacher, I'd be like, nah, man, let me do that. Like, let me see that lesson because I want, if they trying to do it, I want them to be around. And you got to be careful. But as you teach the older kids, you do have a bit more leverage. Because if they're going to college, they're going to be talking about mature subject matter.
Right. Yeah.
Definitely. I don't want to call it ignorance because that's but I think a lot of administration, maybe they just need more. I guess somebody got to put them on. It's like hip hop is being considered. They're like, you should give the kids something different. They're from the hood. I get it. They're from the hood. They're from the hood. Don't give them hip hop. I'm like, yo, hip hop it's the world's most dominant form of expression. It's high art.
Yeah. Oh snap!
Yeah, definitely. We
Dang, he was
technical difficulties with
I
Breeze,
know.
but he was getting into it.
Yeah, he was going in, Joe.
I'm sure he'll come back. Before I ask a similar question to you, Francesca, is there anything that you wanted to say as you were listening in on what Breeze was talking about?
I mean, in terms of like the institution's resistance to hip hop, I think it's like multi-pronged, right? There's a perception of hip hop, obviously, that's carried over many decades. So there's this perception that it's misogynist, it's violent, that and a lot of these attributes are negative. And really, when the administration has these kinds of perceptions of hip hop, what that doesn't give space for is the fact that hip hop is incredibly diverse. It's the biggest form, artistic form, cultural form on the globe, right? And it comes in many varieties. There's many stories that are told, but of course, the administration is only thinking of it in terms of this very narrow perception of hip hop, and so that often taints. The administration's decision as to whether they bring hip hop into the classroom. And so I think the onus is on those of us who know it well, to say there's so much more to hip hop than what you think it is. There's so much that we can glean from it. There's so much that it could teach us, right? And so for me, I teach third-year university students, and my class is called Hip Hop in the City. And the idea is that we teach the history of urbanization across the globe through hip hop in the latter 20th century and the top of the 21st. Because hip hop can teach us so many things about the prison industrial complex, gentrification, urbanization, suburbanization, processes that really hip hop grants a specific window into that you can't really get it from learning about cities from different avenues, right? So you get the voices of people who are affected by these processes, and that's something unique that hip hop brings to the table, right? And another thing that's interesting to me in the way that I teach it is that because the class is global, it's a way to bring in voices from all over the world, right? So a lot of times I'll bring in content. Sometimes it has to be translated because it's in a different language, but it's a way to get students to engage with the stories of all across the world, right? Not just stories in their own locales, but ones that feel similar in terms of similar processes of whether it's like racialization or gendered experiences or class-based experiences. and they're really getting a different perspective from somewhere else on the globe, but also finding the commonalities. And that's one of the things that I think hip hop does really well, right?
Yeah.
In some cases, almost accidentally, just because of the way that the form is, right? That it just happens that it gets taken up all across the world because of its form, but it's a venue for so many diverse stories to come through. So I think when we convey to institutions, this is the value that hip hop brings
Mm.
into the classroom, right? And we give them a way of understanding hip hop that isn't through that very narrow lens. There's so much that could be gleaned, but also I think it's important for the educator to be well versed in hip hop. So that's another
Mm.
kind of phenomena that I see happening. That sometimes there's people who take up the content who don't know it well,
Popular.
and as
Yeah.
a result lean into those stereotypes, and it does a
Uh-huh.
disservice to the culture, right? And
Exactly.
also the way that we're bridging the generations, because I think that's like a great point that Breeze made earlier. It's like when we're from a previous generation, we have our own ideas about like what is good hip hop, like
Right.
what we want to put our energy into,
Yeah.
right?
Totally.
So the thing too is that young people, when they're aware of all of what hip hop has over the past 50 years, I mean, I think we'd be surprised to how much they'll love what we love, and that we can be put onto what they love too, because there's so much value. Like one of the things
Right.
that I think current hip hop, like the hip hop of young people today, one of the things that I think is incredibly valuable in the content that they're making, the art that they're making, is it creates such a space, a tremendous space to talk about mental health, to talk about feeling and emotion in a way, and trauma in a way that perhaps I don't think that it wasn't happening previous to, but maybe we weren't necessarily as attuned to as we are today. So it gives a great space for young people to really talk about those issues, right? And how different processes like racialization impact their well-being, their mental health, right?
Yeah.
And hip hop becomes a vehicle by which to share that information.
Yeah. Totally. Totally. While you were talking, Francesca, Chris Hunts on Facebook said, if you do it, you need to know the history, referring to if you're gonna, have hip hop in the classroom.
Mhm.
And welcome back, Breeze. Good to have you back.
For sure.
Technology.
Technology, yeah. So you said something, Francesca, that made me think. So what do you all think about the organizations, programs, individual instructors that will use rap music, that will like put a rap song together to teach about history or teach about grammar, whatever? It comes on super corny to me, but whatever. How do y'all feel about that? You feel like that's cool if it's teaching something and the kids can relate to it, fine. But what do you think about just using the element of rap outside of the context of the culture and just using the rap to teach?
I mean, I think I'm a very big fan of co-teaching.
Mm.
So I'm not an MC. I wouldn't try it at all because I know I wouldn't be good at it, right?
Right.
So um, I don't. If there's ever an exercise like that I'm interested in bringing to the class, it's not going to be through me, right? Like I'm gonna do the work to co-teach. So like every time that I teach my current class, I bring in IMAS because there is something important about not just being authentically connected to the culture, but having that skill set. That's information that as a practitioner they can convey that I can't, right? So like how
Right.
they approach the art of emceeing, how it informs their identity practice, what hip hop means to them. That's all something that's intimate and personal.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes, as you said, when it's used in that way, when it's brought into the classroom, it can come off as corny, it can come off as inauthentic, and it's always important to contextualize everything. So when we're going to bring hip hop into the classroom, it's also important that students know the context from which it sprung, to understand why that particular artistic practice is so meaningful to the communities from which it emerged,
Yeah.
Yeah.
because it has a history and it has a meaning for them. And that I think as a historian is very important for us to connect the artistic practice to the fact that hip hop is a culture first and foremost, right? And it's connected to certain communities and historical processes, and students need to understand that. And I think when they do
Right.
understand that, they'll also have a deeper appreciation for all of hip hop and not just that which is before them, right, in the present moment. They'll understand, right, the lineage from which so many of the current artists come from and the shoulders that they stand on. And that's an important, knowing context is always and in every scenario really important, I think, in my opinion.
I agree
Yeah.
100%.
Well, on
And I
that
like what
note,
Albertia said. Yeah, I
yeah,
love that
you want
quote.
to
I
read
hope
that,
I'm
Io?
pronouncing her name. Yeah. Classroom rap might be cheesy for older kids. The younger kids dig it. And if the teacher executes it well, students, if nothing else, will acknowledge the skill. Being able to reproduce it is a gift despite the content you use. I definitely agree. Like, because, oh, yeah,
Mhm.
vocabulary is
I've
making
heard
a
of them.
killing. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, yeah. That's dope. Yeah, I agree 100%. Like, especially when you're dealing with like pre-K, kindergarten, first, second, third grade. I think that approach is dope. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, cause that's how we learned that's how I learned ABCs. You sing it, ABCDEFG. Like
Right.
that's a form of a rhyme. You know what I mean? And like we used to. That's how I learned my times tables. Like 1+1 is 1, and 1+2 is 2, and 1+3 is 3. Like that's
Yeah.
a form of rhyming. You know what I mean? So with younger
Right.
kids, yeah. But I think when you get to older kids, then you have to get into like the more critical conversation, like Breeze was
Yeah.
saying, like having those critical conversations and more like in-depth conversations about like hip hop and even current events. You know what I mean? Connecting hip hop with current events and how that connects to like I mean whichever, because I see hip hop very effective in English and history, right? For me, because my major is English, so writing, I see where it fits in perfect. But for those that's doing math and science, I know hip hop can be applied to that, but it takes a little bit more preparation, if
Yeah.
that makes sense, within
Yeah.
those subjects of education. But that's just my opinion.
No, I
But
feel you.
yeah,
I just feel
yeah,
like sometimes, what I've experienced is like a teacher will speak very demeaning of hip hop and then turn
yes,
around and like make a rap for the kids to memorize. And it's like, well, come on, because I mean, if you're gonna rap for younger kids, yeah, older people are probably gonna think it's cheesy because you have to, know who
yeah,
your audience is. You're not gonna
right,
be scientific and spitting all these cannabis verses for a first grade year old. You know what I mean? Like you're gonna speak a first grade language so that a first grader can understand. So
right,
nothing wrong
right.
with that. Yeah. And Francesca, do you rap? No, you said you don't rap.
I do not.
Have you ever tried where you're like, maybe I could do this? Did you ever try?
No. I
No.
used to I'm an artist, so I used to dance
Oh, nice.
for a significant amount of my, I would say, well into my late teenage years. So part of coming back, when I went to do my university degree, part of going to graduate school wasn't just to go to graduate school. It was my attempt to marry my love for history with the
Mm,
fact that I'm a creative, right? I wanted it to be
yeah.
I wanted the focus to be on the creative arts. So, and then of course, being the age that I am and hip hop's all around me from the point at which I'm, I enter the world, it's like, it made sense to me that that was the natural evolution. So
Yeah.
that I took what I loved already and pursued it as an artistic, sorry, I should say an academic, right, field of study.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, that's really like where I kind of marry the love of hip hop. And I think generally for me, it was always my early work as a graduate student was really focused on the power of lyrics, social consciousness of lyrics, to just really speak back to systems of power. So my early work is on the 1970s, 80s through to the mid 90s, and how MCs used hip hop culture to speak back to systems of power. And I
Mhm.
think that's, speaking to what Ima said earlier in terms of hip hop and its relationship to history. I think what you see happen in the late 20th century is that MCs are using the craft to
Mm,
really help, in the case of the United States, help the public reimagine what life is
Mhm.
like, right? What history
yeah.
is, right? To give a counter story. That's what's so powerful about hip hop. So for
Mhm.
me, that's really been the driving force, to use it as hip hop becomes another way to tell history, right?
Yeah.
To give an alternative voice, to create a whole, an entirely new way of looking at history through the lens of young people, through the lens of young racialized people, people who are living in underserved communities, right? There's a whole list of kind of identity markers,
Yeah.
but it becomes another a route to story. And I think, again, that's what makes it so easily the way we can kind of just like easily bridge it into education, because so much of education is about story, whether even when we're talking about math or science, social studies, whatever it is, a lot
Right.
of it, as human beings, we're encircled, right, by story. That's just like how
Yeah.
we live and how we convey every day who we are to each other, that sort of thing. So I think that's one of the most powerful elements of hip hop, and it goes across all the elements, because even when you're looking at dancers, they too are telling a story, right?
Right.
It just doesn't
With their
have.
bodies. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I'm sorry, I think you said this, but can you remind us what grade you teach?
I teach third year university
Third
or
year
college
university.
for your
Yeah.
American audiences.
Right.
So, and I teach a class on hip hop. It's called Hip Hop in the City, but I've also taught many other classes about the history of popular culture.
Do you feel supported in teaching hip hop in the classroom?
It's a complicated, it's a
Yeah.
complicated
You
conversation.
can't speak on it.
Well, I will say that I think so this is a question of like there's national issues too, right? So what I mean
Yeah.
by that is I think in the US there's a much greater openness to hip hop studies. I think in part that's just because it's been in existence for much longer, right? It's been
Mm,
introduced to the academy for a much longer period of time.
right.
So, with that comes the development of scholars who do that work, who then come into the university and push for certain programming, right? So that's just kind of how this university is structured. Whereas in Canada, we haven't had that same length of time to develop hip hop programming and scholars
Mm,
and that sort of thing. So we're dealing with that. But also, I think, as I mentioned earlier, it's also the interpretation of what is hip hop, and can hip hop really help teach X subject, right? So, and that's just going to entail the creativity of the teachers, right, that
right.
come into these institutions to say, yes, of course, hip hop can teach, STEM, or hip hop can
Right.
teach math or whatever, right? So I think it's a constant process of just like pushing up against what are the assumptions of administrators, but also I think what really helps is the fact that as these courses come into being, students are so excited about it, right? And they
Yeah.
finally, I mean, one of the common themes among my students every end of term is like, this class changed my life. It spoke to me in ways that like nothing I've taken in university ever has. I felt
Right.
seen. I felt like I was taking a class about who I am and what I consume and what's around me, right? And that in and of itself could be deeply transformative for students to see things in their course offerings that actually speak to who they are, where it
Yeah.
doesn't feel like school. It feels
Right.
like,
Exactly.
but
Yeah.
it is, right? But
Right.
Yeah.
it's them taking something where they just feel so connected because they're connected to the culture.
Right. Man, that's powerful.
Especially like in her in French in Dr. Francesca's class, you see the students build community too. You know what I mean?
Mm,
Like even outside of the class, the conversation begins in the class, but they may start a WhatsApp group and continue those
mm,
conversations. You know what I'm saying? Within the group, and it's teaching them to like think a different way because they one
yeah.
of the because I've been in a class where the students tell Francesca that like they're like, man, like I feel like I could like my voice is being heard in this
Yeah.
space. You know what I mean? Like it's a place for me here. Like, and in academia, you feel like you don't want to raise your hand or you don't want to
Mm,
engage in conversation because of that rigidness that exists,
yeah.
especially in the university level. You know what I mean? But to come into a class where you can have I call it reciprocal, like reciprocal teaching with your teacher, where it's not just the teacher spewing out a bunch of, just giving you a lecture, but it's like actually engaging in conversation. You know what I'm saying? And encouraging you to engage in conversation. Like, I
Yeah.
want to hear your voice. Like, your voice is important in this space.
Hmm.
Let's hear your voice. Like, what do you think? Based off of what I said, what are your thoughts? How do you feel about that? You know what I mean? Like, that's needed in the academy, and that's needed in in the institution on any level, whether that's with kindergarten, elementary, middle school, high school, on into college and university. It's
Yeah.
needed.
And I think too, it extends beyond like just the content. So it's even just allowing the students to talk as they would, if
Hmm.
as they would amongst themselves. So like for example,
Exactly.
Yep.
given that we're obviously still in a pandemic, a lot of the teaching over the past 2 years has been online. So you'll look at the chat and the students are typing like, this is lit, and
Right.
I mean that's like a benign example, but the point is like, if they were in another class, that's probably that way of conversing and exchanging with their peers and their instructor probably wouldn't be permitted, right? Or there wouldn't be space for that. So it's because hip hop culture is so multidimensional. It's everything from the way you speak to the fashion to how you
Yeah.
exchange with one another to what you like, to the different kinds of pillars, to knowledge of self. Right? It's so multidimensional, and when you teach hip hop in the classroom and you truly understand the culture, you're bringing all of those dimensions into the class. So it's not
Hmm.
just this is a university classroom space and we're abiding by the rules of the university. No, we're making this whole space hip hop so that
Exactly.
everybody
Mm.
feels comfortable to not just take it as course content, but you're engaging with the fullness of the culture.
Yeah.
And again, that's something that uh, can happen at an yeah, I think when we're talking about older students, right, the challenges are a bit different, right, or the issues or the ways to approach education are a bit different when you're talking about elementary school kids, high school kids, that sort of thing. So obviously the way you convey the content and teach hip hop education is going to be different depending on who your
Right.
audience is.
Yeah,
Totally.
absolutely. I like the comment, the question that Albertia. I hope I'm
Right.
saying her name. Forgive me if I'm not saying your name correctly. But I like when she said, "What makes hip hop different than basic rhyme or the use of other literary devices? Like if I use rhyme, alteration, repetition, etc., to drive a point in class, am I using hip hop?" And I would say I agree. Like I think I think those are elements of hip hop. And in employment they have this term called transferable skills, right?
Ah,
Where it's
yes.
like, you know what I mean? Like I think those certain elements of hip hop can be transferable into, like, I like what Breeze Bruin talked about, the call and response, you know what I mean? Like in the classroom, or creating your lesson plans in a way where it's like you doing your set list. You know what I'm saying? Like things of that's transferable. Like, and basically what Alberta was saying too, like the repetition and the use of rhyme and alliteration and the other elements that I was trying to write them down, but he was rattling them off so fast. But all of that, like you can use. I think all of that is transferable from the hip hop culture, even rap culture, even the element of rap. You can implement those things into your teaching practices. So I would say yes. For me, I definitely think that you are using hip hop in that
Man,
sense. Yeah, yeah,
that's
yeah,
cool. Dr. Francesca, do you remember a moment or maybe a series of moments when you realized like, oh, wow, I could do this. I could have hip hop in the classroom. Maybe you saw someone else do it first. Like where did that idea pop into your mind? Do you remember that?
Hmm. I don't know if I remember, to be honest. I mean, my personal history is that I went to an art school
Mm,
when I was in high school. So I would say the fact of bringing art into the classroom was always around me, even before I went to the university. Right. So
yeah.
I went to a school that was very much like the movie Fame. Right. You'd walk down the hallways and you'd see people
Right.
dancing. People playing instruments. Like that was my life. So when I went to university, I really felt a big gap, right? Moving from a world that was like so deeply, where obviously you went to get your education, but you were so deeply couched in creativity all the
Yeah.
time. And
Yeah.
when you go to a space that doesn't really create room for that, doesn't advocate for that, doesn't put that as top of mind, is really hard to make that transition. So for me, moving into grad school was really an attempt to try and recreate that for both myself, right, as a student, but
Yeah.
also when I became a teacher, was to recreate that for the students in my class. Because, again, I think one of the things is comes like clearly across when you're teaching young people is that art is all around them, right? It's in everything they do all the time.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times when they're coming into the classroom, it feels like that's being divorced from them, or it's not part of that experience. And I think, again, as someone who has always been creative, that's a muscle that people really have to cultivate, because even if you're not artistically inclined, you need creativity moving forward in any kind of work that you do, right? You need it. You need to be creative in dealing with problems, right? To problem
Right.
solve. And so
Yeah.
it's a skill that you need. And so, again, it's like reminding people that bringing art and culture into the classroom is actually really important to just cultivating life skills, right? And so when we're teaching
Yeah.
hip hop, it's not just teaching hip hop. I mean, we're teaching about how do people deal with a large issue like gentrification. How do people deal with the challenges of the prison industrial complex? I mean, these are large scale issues that don't necessarily have to do with art, but we can gain a lot, we can learn a
Yeah.
lot from artists, right, who are teaching us from their vantage point.
Yo, I can't. That's so dope. I can't help but think about an analogy that frustrates me. I do a lot of work in like interfaith spaces, and in
Hmm.
the world of religion, oftentimes the thought is like you come to this religious space, and that's where you learn about faith.
Hmm.
But in my experience, the faith is what happens in your day to day life.
Hmm.
And when
Absolutely.
you go to a religious setting, that's when you get to talk about it and learn new language to use to describe these experiences and to make sense of all these experiences that don't always make sense. And it sounds like what you're doing is that holistic approach of, it's not that you walk in this door and all of a sudden you've got the secret knowledge, and you give it to them, but everyone's coming in with their experiences and their
Exactly.
voices, and you're, just trying to build community
Hmm.
to make sense of it all, and using hip hop community as a way to express and talk about it, which sounds fantastic. I want to take your class.
You should. It's a
I,
dope class.
I
It
mean,
need to be longer. It's short, but it need to
12
be a year
weeks.
long. Cause that boy fire, bro. Your
Yeah.
class is dope.
And I
Yeah.
think too, like another lesson, and again, it's like these are things that your students teach you too. It's not
Yeah.
just something
Right.
that you cultivate and convey. But
Right.
I mean, my class this past term, they became so close. I mean, they had a whole other world going on, like on WhatsApp by
Wow.
themselves. They created a whole other world unto themselves of community. So much so to the point that, again, like the whole class was online, right, as a
That's
consequence of
awesome.
COVID. Um, but they created such a community and a family vibe that they actually are trying to like meet one another collectively as a whole offline, right?
Yeah.
Because one of the things that I always say to my students is like hip hop is also about community, right? It's about
Yes.
taking care of each other and looking out for each other, protecting one another, right? And that's something, again, that you could cultivate in your classroom, because the classroom is a family for students,
Right.
right? It's a space of support if it's cultivated in that way,
Right.
right? And for young people, especially, they spend, like, especially we're talking about elementary and high school students, they spend probably more time in their class with their peers and their
Yeah.
teacher than they might necessarily spend with their parents,
Totally.
right?
Yeah.
Or their grandparents, or whoever
Right.
is their support system, because they
Right.
spend so much time at school,
Fact.
right? So cultivating that relationship and set of relationships is also really important, and it's part of what hip hop culture does, right? Hip hop culture is all about relationships.
Yeah.
So again, those are lessons that get conveyed. You have to be deliberate about them, right? But it's part of creating that kind of holistic learning environment.
Yeah.
And I love what you said too, Francesca. Like when you talked about like allowing people to come in with their own experiences and their knowledges. And I know we said
Hmm.
that before, but I think that the professor or the teacher is the person that sets that 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 environment,
Yeah.
right? Sets that temperature. Like, you know what I mean? Like I'm not the gatekeeper of all knowledge. You know what I'm
Mhm.
saying? Like I'm accepting the knowledge and experience that you come into the classroom with. And if we get to a point of the discussion or a point of learning where I don't know the answer. I'm comfortable with saying like I don't know the answer. Let's figure it
Yeah.
out together as a community. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Especially in grades like grade 4, grade 5, grade 6. Those because a lot of times a friend of mine just did a I'm sorry to take us off top, but I'm
You
gonna be
good?
real quick. A friend of mine just did a TED talk in Detroit. His name is Mr. Ian the D. I should have invited him. He'll be at the next one. Mr. Ian the D, and he talked about how education is supposed to be loud, right? It was like it's this misconception that if your classroom is quiet, then learning is
Mm.
happening. He's like, nah.
Nah.
He's like, that don't work for my son who like he's like, Daddy, we gotta be quiet at the lunchroom table. Then we gotta be quiet at school
Mhm.
in the classroom. And then if I'm not quiet, then they take my recess away from me. You know what I'm
Mhm.
saying? So he's like, education is supposed to be loud. It's supposed to be that space
Right.
where
Yeah.
conversation is happening. You know what I mean?
Totally.
Energy is happening, like an exchange of energy,
Mhm.
ideas, and creativity. And I feel like that's been taken away. That gets taken away after like kindergarten, first and second and third grade, based on my experience. Like they don't teach you to imagine anymore or be
Right.
creative anymore. Like why is that taken away when you get in upper grades? Like we should still be imagining. We should still be
Totally.
creative. And I
Mhm.
think what Dr. Francesca was saying is like I love that, like creating that space where that exchange is happening, and I think that's very important. And that's why her class is so dope, and that's why it's like it transforms students. Like instead of working in silos, like let's do this, let's build this WhatsApp group and continue the conversation. Not only like way past this class, even through the duration of us graduating, let's continue to build and be in community with each other. I think that's important. That's super important. Sorry. I get excited, man. This
Good.
my
It's good.
this my this my this my thing right here.
Oh,
Mhm.
you're good, man. This is hey,
Mhm.
this is why we're doing it. Well, part of the reason why we're doing it. I did want to ask you to let the people know, how are you like where are you at? Like Dr. Francesca obviously is
Yes,
teaching
yes, yes,
to
yes.
collegiate level and
Yeah.
you're on your path. Can you just kind of tell the people out there kind of where you are in your journey
Oh
in
yeah,
education?
yeah. I'm currently pursuing a PhD in social justice education at the University of Toronto. Um, that's it's called OISE, um, Ontario Institute for Studies in Education. And so my work is around critical hip hop pedagogy and within Black studies, and how do we use critical hip hop pedagogy as a teaching practice and a theoretical framework through a methodology called youth participatory action research. So one of my problems with the academy is like when people from the outside of communities come in and then they do their research, interview a few kids, and then write their dissertation. So
Mm,
this is putting the power back into the students' hands where they could be their own researchers. So me, I'll be working collaboratively with youth for them to tell their stories through, ethno, what they call it, ethnographical,
mm,
ethnography. I think that's the
Mhm.
ethnography, yeah.
term.
Yep.
Yeah, where they can tell their own stories, right, and talk
Right.
about their own experiences if they're especially if they're in a learning environment that's oppressive, right? Like those learning environments where the things that we're talking about is not happening or it's not
Right.
taking place,
Yeah.
or especially if it's like anti-black spaces, especially for like
Yeah.
black students. So that's what my work is about. It's allowing them to tell their stories. And hip hop is not just about performative, because a lot of people
Right.
do hip hop and they like want to teach the kids how to DJ. Like, oh, look at them DJ, look at them
Mhm.
rhyme. This is more of like using like what we was talking about, transferable skills in hip hop
Right.
and translate it in a sense where they can like express themselves. It could be a documentary. It don't necessarily have to be a rap. It could be through a documentary. It could be through a written piece. It could
Right.
be through anything, whatever they put their mind to, they can create something that could tell their story. And hopefully that will invoke change. And like the definition that I love for hip hop, I always use it is, I know people get tired of me saying it, but this definition of hip hop, it resonates with me so much. It's like hip is to know and hop is to move. And the more you know, the more you move into action to create change. And that's
Yeah.
what it's about. So
Man, I
that's what my
love that.
work is about in a nutshell. Yeah,
Mhm.
You know,
yeah,
as both of you kind of describe what you where you are, what you do, I think about the MC, like great MCs, are truly master of ceremonies. They're the master of the crowd, and they can't just show up without knowing who the crowd is. And they, oftentimes get to know the crowd very quickly, just in the spur of the moment. But then they use what the crowd brings,
Mhm.
and they use the energy of the crowd and they interact with the crowd and they create an experience. And to me, that's what a great teacher does.
yeah.
And you've both touched on that, tonight, which is super dope. So I applaud both of you. It's great. I've worked as an assistant teacher in the public school system in Cincinnati, and I still do some work. I do after school program right now with kids, and yeah, I've seen teachers that are not good, and
Right.
I've seen
Me
teachers
too.
that are great. They're
Exactly.
the essence of what an MC is, and they
Yeah.
really create an environment where they're really moving, in
Mhm.
unison with their kids and creating that culture of give and take in community. So I applaud
Mhm.
both of you for what you do and what you are
Mhm.
working on
Thank
doing in
you,
the
bro.
future.
Thank
Yeah,
Thank you, bro.
you.
no
Thank
doubt,
you.
no doubt. I
Yeah.
have just a few more questions. I almost you can think if you have anything else, but I am
Oh
before
yeah,
that.
yeah, for sure.
I'm curious to know what that is in the background and what that's about. It looks like a Public
Yeah, break it
Enemy.
down. Yeah,
The
break it
Public
Oh,
down,
the Public
Enemy.
Enemy.
Francesca.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it
yeah.
looks dope. What is that about?
It's Fight the Power. So it's
Okay,
an
right on.
artistic piece by Justin Bua, who is like a very well
Oh,
known visual artist.
yes, he's dope.
So I have a deep affinity for Public Enemy. My PhD work was on Public Enemy's work and that period of like 1979 to 1995 and the way that MCs really use the craft to literally fight the power and the
I
different
love
powers
it.
that be because they were always tackling different issues.
Yeah.
So I keep Chuck close.
That's
I
great.
deeply admire him. And just I think too and this is kind of coming back to what you had said earlier, Amos, about teaching, like this perception that hip hop is about these artistic crafts, right? That it's about rapping or it's about dancing, the
Mhm.
visual art component, the DJing. But one of the things that oftentimes administrators miss is that hip hop is also about a consciousness. There's a
Yeah.
particular way that when hip hop was introduced in the late 20th century, it really shifted the way young people thought about politics, thought about engaging on different issues.
Yeah, for sure.
It really changed the way they, also just the tone at which they engaged, right? There
Mhm.
was a kind of um, there was a spirit, right, a rebellious spirit that hip hop brings in, and uh,
Mhm.
hip hop uses that spirit everywhere it goes. So I think too, there's a misperception that hip hop is about these very distinct artistic pillars and not that it is in its entirety a culture. And what we mean by that is, it's a way of being, it's a way of walking in the world, understanding the world. It's a way of tackling particular issues, right? I think a lot about the text by Joan Morgan where she talks about hip hop feminism, right? There's a way that women engage with hip hop that female activists before them, there's a difference. There's a shift in the way that they engage the question of feminism. So I think, again, with the work of people in spaces of education, whether that is in after school programs, elementary, high school, or at the collegiate level, there's a lot of work to be done to also just transform the way that hip hop is thought of. And if we
Yeah.
think about it in this broadest of senses, then there's one of the things I said to my students a couple weeks ago is we were talking about, one of my students was interested in going into psychotherapy, right? And I said, well, you could bring hip hop into psychotherapy.
Exactly.
There you
And she
go.
said, really? And I was like, there's a whole gamut of people doing hip hop therapy, right? They're taking
Mhm.
hip hop and applying it to different therapeutic principles, right? And these are things that as we just kind of continue to open up our own minds, the minds of our students, and just encourage them to take hip hop in its essence everywhere that they go, then, and it's already everywhere. It's all around us in ways that
It
a lot of
is.
people aren't even conscious of. It's in the way that advertisements are pitched to us. It's in the way that books are written. The kind of discourse and language that people use. So
Mhm.
again, I think just reminding people of how much it is a part of everything that is around us, even if even if you don't like hip hop, or even if you're not into it. I'm always reminded of this phrase that a journalist out of Toronto uses by the name of Dawson Higgins, where he says it's a hip hop world and you're just living in it. And that's
Yeah,
so true, right? It's
yeah, it
becoming
is.
more and more true as we move throughout the years. So again, I think that's the role that we can play too, as we are, the people in the academy who create these bridges between hip hop culture and community outside of the ivory tower, and then obviously in these spaces, not just at the collegiate level, but
Yeah.
the teachers that are doing this important work in other spaces of education. That it can also include places like the church, right?
Yeah.
Places like the mosque, right?
Right.
Because that's another thing I think that we don't spend enough time talking about, how hip hop creates a vehicle for faith, right? And conversations about belief systems, and it deals with the diversity of faith-based issues, right? So there's so much that hip hop does and can do, and again, I think it's our role as educators to just increasingly introduce those conversations in these spaces as much as possible.
Yeah. That's
I'm
all.
glad
I love
Francesca
it.
said that as I'm tearing up stuff, trying to get to this book. Y'all hear me like
You're good, I
tearing up
almost.
stuff. I was trying to get this book to show Francesca and you too and you Till that I got this book, Hip Hop and Religion.
Oh,
Have you
wow.
heard of this book,
No, I have not.
Francesca?
Nah.
Yeah, I just got that.
That's
I can't wait to
incredible.
dig into this
Oh
book,
wow.
man.
That
Like
is
it got like
incredible.
several articles about just what you're talking about. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, yeah, man. I can't wait to dig into this for real. But just based off of what you were saying, Francesca, that's
Mhm,
dope.
mhm.
Yeah, yeah,
You
that's
have to
dope.
pass me that title for sure.
Oh yeah, I got you. I got you for sure. Yeah,
Yo,
yeah,
shout
yeah.
out. And shout out to Yafeth from YGT Records. He was feeling what
Thank
you
you.
were talking about, Dr. Francesca. Great breakdown from Francesca.
Yeah.
Love the art piece in the back too.
Thank you.
Yes.
No
Oh,
doubt,
speaking of
no
the art
doubt.
piece, do you have a favorite Public Enemy album? Or you just
Oh, it's
like the group
definitely
in
Fear of a
general?
Black Planet.
Fear of
It's
a
I
Black
knew
Planet.
that. I
All
knew that's what it was.
right.
That's
Yeah.
what's
I
up.
mean, that album is like, do you want a history lesson? That's a history lesson. That is
Yeah.
just a way of understanding the world and power, the dynamics of power. I just, I think Chuck is a gift
Yeah.
on so
Yeah.
many levels. The way his mind works, the kinds of things that he introduced to the public, the way that he expanded, and not just he. I want to attribute it to all of Public Enemy, but the way that they expanded the audience and got people who really, I think, when we get to the 1980s, we don't have the same kind of conversation about whiteness and white supremacy, and white privilege in the 1980s as we do today, right? But I think Chuck and Public Enemy found a way to use hip hop to create a conversation around these issues of power, and dominance and inequality that really transformed the world. I think we don't give enough credit to a lot of these artists for doing that important work.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
Welcome. I see the comment. Welcome to the
Yeah.
Terror Dome.
Yeah.
That is,
Chris. He
Yeah.
he
yeah,
loves that.
Big
Yeah.
Chris.
that's actually the title of my dissertation. Welcome to the Terror
Oh,
Dome.
is
Welcome
it
to tell.
really?
Yes,
Yeah, it
That's dope.
is. That boy
I
yes, it
love it.
is.
fire.
Mhm.
That's
Yeah.
great. Iomas, anything lingering for you
Mm,
that you wanted to
no,
ask
I
about
just
tonight?
wanted to. I wanted to catch a few of these comments.
Sure,
Tyrone
yeah.
Jackson said, "Why
Go ahead.
82%?" Shared a. I guess this is a article. Why 82% of public schools are failing, by Grace Chen. Secretary Arne Duncan estimated that 82% of this country's public schools are not passing the tests in educating our children. And I like what Gloria Miller said. She said public schools are an abomination. Public schools should be abandoned. They've become prisons. The teachers are overpaid and the students are underserved. Schools are Marxist indoctrination camps. Wow. Wow. That's a deep statement. Wow. Wow. Yeah. What do you think about that, Francesca? That statement. Marxist indoctrinate.
I definitely think if we consider the way schools are structured. And again, I'm coming out of a Canadian context, which is different than a U.S. context, but based
Yes,
on
yes.
my familiarity with U.S. public schooling, You know, I think we see a lot of the carceral logics that developed in the late 20th, you know, over the 20th century, but also in the late 20th century, you know, pouring into schools in the way that schools really have various ways that schools are structured are along a punishment scheme, right? So
Yeah.
speaking to, you know, the comments that both of you made earlier about, you know, where is the encouragement to be creative and to be innovative, right? These are such important skills
Right.
for dialogue, right? Where schooling becomes a conversation. So when you have these carceral logics and punishment logics framing learning, where really learning becomes about training people to be proper citizens, and I say that in quotations, right? Good
Yeah.
citizens. What you really do is you kill the spirit of young people, right? And the
Yeah.
way that they too, you know, one of the things that's so wonderful about hip hop that I always try to remind my students is this was a culture created by like 14-year-old
Absolutely.
14-year-old
Mm.
people, right? 15-year-old people, 16-year-old people. So to think that they could have imagined such a tremendous world and launched it, right, is a credit to also how we should be treating young people in schooling systems, right? To remember that they are creators, they're innovators, they have the answers to
Mm,
questions and problems, right?
yeah.
And I think so much of schooling is about um, training people to think in a particular way rather than inviting them into a dialogue and inviting them to be independent thinkers and to ask questions, right? So much of learning should actually be about questions, just
Questions. Yeah.
pursuing questions rather
Yeah.
than
Mm,
assuming that the answers are already there.
absolutely.
And we're continually forced to do that in so many sectors of life, right? Schooling isn't
Mm,
just the only place. It's when we encounter the media, right? It's when we encounter politics that, you know, rather than giving people the space to ask question after question and say, like, how can we pursue these answers, right? How can we
Right.
work together? Let's talk to people on the other side, right? Let's
mm,
have genuine transformative dialogue, right? That
yeah.
kind of clamping down on the spirit of people starts in schooling.
Yeah.
So much
True.
of how we can transform the world is transforming an
Mm,
institution like that, right? To say,
yeah.
let's make it more open, creative, innovative, and where I think one of the things that I've often said to like teachers when I've done teacher training, in terms of thinking about hip hop pedagogy is, you know, one of the things that hip hop is great is because it's multi generational, right?
Mm. Yep.
We might know a lot about the 1980s, the 90s, maybe the 2000s, but the students know a lot about the 2010s.
Yeah.
So what happens when we get into a classroom and we relinquish that power and say, like, y'all teach us, right? What can we learn from what your generation is trying to create using hip hop? That takes off so much pressure on teachers too, right? Because they
Absolutely.
come into the understanding of teaching is a dialogue. It is not just
Right.
dictatorial where we're trying to convey all of our knowledge, right? This kind of banking system thinking about learning where all we do is we're supposed to deposit ideas. Students come
Right.
with all kinds of their own ideas. And actually, if we invited them to share, and if we were open to the fact that we have to absorb also what they're giving us, then it would
Mm,
really make for a different environment, right?
yeah.
So I think there's a lot, you know, we can go a long way in terms of just transforming classroom spaces. And hip
Yeah.
hop is a way, right, for the people who are doing hip hop pedagogy work. Hip hop is a way to say, let's find a different way to
Yeah.
approach this space.
Right.
Absolutely. And I kind of just, I don't think public schools need to be abandoned. I think it needs to be reimagined. You know, I think it need to be reimagined. Like basically just to piggyback off of everything that Dr. Francesca said, like it needs to be like the hierarchical structure of teaching needs to be, they need to get rid of that. You know what I mean? Like it's like I said before, the teacher is not the gatekeeper to knowledge, right? It's creating that community of learning and creating that space where that exchange is happening, you know. And like the schools, the current way the school is set up now, Bettina Love talks about it in her book, where she talked about spirit murder, right? Like those places where it murders the spirit of the student. And we don't want to do that. We want to rekindle the spirit of the student or like continue to flame that fire that's in the student to learn and to take ownership of their learning. And like
Yeah.
I'll never forget when I went to South Africa in like 2009, we went to go visit a school and the teachers, the kids were teaching each other. The teacher was
Mm.
just in the classroom to make sure the kids were staying on point. They were running that classroom, man. It was like the most amazing thing I had ever seen in my life. Like the students were teaching each other, and then after the class was over, we had a chance to interview the teacher and a couple of the students. And we was like, "Why did you set your classroom up like that?" He's like, "Because unless they take ownership of their own learning, it's nothing that I can teach them. They have to take
Mm.
ownership of their own learning." So I think in public school spaces, we have to create that environment where young people are taking ownership of their own learning, right? In different methods and how they may learn, because each child learns differently. Some may be auditory learners, some may be visual learners, some may be, you know what I mean? So we have to like create those spaces where students can thrive and learn at their own pace. And I don't think there's nothing wrong with creating what do you call them, cohorts or study groups, even as young as first grade. Like, where you putting, I don't want to use that term stronger and weaker student, because all students, they're different, I would say. But creating those learning groups where they can like bounce off each other and have conversations amongst each other, I just think that's what's needed in the public school
Yeah.
space. And if
Mhm.
we can't imagine, if the public school space can't be reimagined, then I think maybe we do need to abandon that space, you
Yeah.
know.
For sure.
But yeah, I think that should be the first approach. You know what I
And
mean?
I think
And
too,
that's just my opinion.
when we think
Yeah.
about like the spirit, when we think about the spirit of a student, right? Uh, Students will take control of their own education when that spirit is invigorated, right?
Good
They will
point.
want to be in class. They will want to learn. But
Absolutely.
so much of that is like we could talk about, are students seeing themselves in the content? Are they feeling like when they come to the classroom they're valued, right? That there's a space for their
Mhm.
voice and the things that they're interested in. Do they feel listened to? I mean, that's one of the things that I think we don't talk enough about in education,
Mhm.
which is that,
Be-
do you take time to listen to your student, to learn them, right? To see like,
Mm.
what are you interested in? What do you do when you're not in class, right? What excites you? To just learn about what they're going through, right? What they're facing. Because I teach mostly young adults. These are young people who, they're working, they have full-time jobs, they're going to school, they might, be taking care of their families, and there's so much that colors their school experience. And if we only look at them through the lens of the student and what they're delivering in the classroom, then we're missing so much of the picture of who they are, right?
Absolutely.
And if we had all of that, if we had access to all of that, and part of that is also instilling a trust, right? And I think one of the things that I always find troubling about teachers is that there's an assumption that because of the teacher, they should immediately be trusted. Like,
Mhm.
not in life, people earn trust. So that should translate also into the classroom. You have to earn that, right? And when students trust you, then it creates a whole other dimension to learning, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Because they'll be able to tell you about the things that they're facing as students, but also the things that are affecting their ability to successfully be a student in the classroom space, right?
And it sounds like if Yafeth from YGT Records had that, his situation would be different. He says, I was definitely pushed through the public school system. Education is important, but at the time, the environment I was in was the last place I wanted to be.
See?
And I've seen this again and again with young people.
Mhm.
Um, they're just not engaged, and the teachers, whether it's they're not trained properly or lazy or what, I don't know what the case is. Every teacher is different. But we're just not engaging young people the way we need to. Yeah, oftentimes, at least from my experience, what I've seen.
And I think
And
too, like we hear the stories of hip hop, like if you hear the story of like Nas as an example, right? These are bright young people, and the system, because of the way that it's structured, pushes them out, right? Doesn't
Yeah,
value the things that they bring to the table. But when you see them in their element where they thrive, so like if they're really into emceeing and they thrive, and that's like a language based craft, right?
right. Yeah,
They're doing things that are teaching and learning in another space, right? But somehow when they come into a teaching and learning, a dedicated teaching learning space, that same energy, enthusiasm, passion
mhm.
doesn't translate. I mean, that's not because of the student, that's because of how the system is structured,
yeah,
right?
true.
Yeah.
And that's
And again, it's an indictment. Like, we really have to be clear, I think, about thinking more about the system, how teachers are trained, what
Mhm.
yeah,
what passes as important and necessary content, how that
Yeah.
content is conveyed to students, right? And having the willingness to reimagine, right, all of those elements. So much of it is, you know, there's this perception that there's a way to do this and this is the way we're going to continue on
Right.
with it, rather than thinking, can we problem solve or figure out a way to make this a
Mhm.
more effective institution? And you know, like anything, nothing is static. So we've also, like, as teachers, as educators, we've got to move with,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and listen to the students when the students tell us, like, this is not working for me. Let's
Right.
give them the space to vocalize that and to look at them, because teaching is, I think, in my opinion, is co-created, right?
Yeah.
So if I'm not listening to my students, I'm not doing a very good job at creating a
Right.
teaching and learning environment.
Yeah.
And I had this crazy idea where I think students, because students are, like we said earlier, students are in the classroom more times than even in their own home. I think we should be putting students in positions on hiring committees to hire teachers. You know what I mean? If you're in a
Ooh,
high
that's
school
radical.
setting, yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's radical, but I think students should be on hiring committees, like where, and I'm talking about, it has to be like at a certain level. At obviously, it can't be like kindergartners, like yeah, they, you know, what I'm saying in the interview session coloring, they not even paying attention. I'm talking like on a high school level, a middle school level. I think students need to be on hiring committees, like if because they're going to be with that teacher all the time, and if they have an instant, and one thing I love about students, and that's why I love working with young people. If they like you, they like you. You know what I'm saying? And they'll tell you to your face, I don't like you. You know what I'm saying? We the one as adults, we put up fronts and we'll laugh in your face and we may not necessarily like you, but we'll play the game. But students,
Right.
they super direct. If they not messing with you, they not rocking with you. And you have to build that trust over time. And I think we need to have those type of spaces too, where we think about students being on hiring committees or students just creating like black student unions where they work hand in hand with administration as well.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like I tell my students all the time, like if you instead of getting in trouble with your teacher, go to your principal and ask them what is the vision for your school and how can I work with you? How can I work with you to bring forth that vision? You know what I'm saying? Start working in partnership. But see, the way the system is set up now, again, it's that hierarchy thing. Like it's a line that it's a line that students shouldn't cross, and it's a line for teachers that they shouldn't cross. Because I think one of the biggest things, and I think Jay Ross and John Robinson talk about that in their book, is building relationships with your
Mm-hmm.
students.
Right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's frowned upon as
Mm-hmm.
far as administration. Like, oh no, you can't build relationships with your students. I think that's super important to do
Mm-hmm.
that.
And I
To
think, I
build
mean,
relationships. Yeah.
I think
Go
that
ahead. I'm
speaks
sorry.
to, oh, no problem. I think it speaks to, you know, earlier I said that one of the things I think teachers should do is get to know their students better, right? Because
Mhm.
that makes for, it also just makes your job as a teacher easier, because you'll know how to help them and support
Right.
them, right? But
Mhm.
that goes in the opposite direction. So imagine if they knew you, right? They had an opportunity to really get to know their teacher and build a
Yeah.
relationship, right? Then you don't just become this person who grades their papers and gives them marks they don't like. You know,
Exactly.
you become someone who, especially when you're able to convey to them, if you are that kind of teacher, that you're here to help them grow, right? To help them grow into themselves and into their talents, right? And to support them on their journey, because you want to know, you know, where do you want to go? What do you want to do with your life? So if there's that kind of relationship building that goes in both directions, that also goes a long way for creating a classroom environment where everyone feels like, oh, I'm not coming to do school, right? Like,
Yeah.
how many students I've had to say, like, I look forward to coming to this class, right? And that's
Mhm.
not something a lot of teachers could say about their students,
Right.
right? So what would happen if we created learning practices that looked like that, teaching and learning practices that look like that, where it doesn't feel like I'm straining to come to class or I'm not looking forward to it. I'm actually excited, right? To not just learn, but to be in relation with people, right? With
Yeah.
my peers, with my teacher, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. That's really, yeah, this is good. This stuff.
So thinking about our conversation tonight, Iomas and I have been talking about, having something like this ongoing, every 3, 4 months, something to that effect. Um, what do you think would be helpful for folks that are in hip hop in some way? They're MCs or producers, DJs, or just just grew up in it, um, and are also in education. What kind of space do you think would be helpful for them that we might be able to provide?
That's a good question. I think definitely networking, right? Like
Mm,
getting to know other educators across different regions and spaces,
yeah.
exchanging. I know a lot of teachers always talk about exchanging resources, and that's great. But I think also what's important is exchanging strategies, right? To
Mm,
like teaching strategies, what works, what doesn't work,
yeah.
um, having that space to kind of like bounce off ideas amongst each other, because so much of, I think, when you run a classroom, so much of it is, you're doing it solo, right?
Right.
Especially if you're doing a hip hop based classroom, I think that's different than other classrooms because you're trying to cultivate an entire spirit in the classroom,
Mm,
right? Even just the way you teach, like the way I'm talking to you right now is how I teach my class. I don't change the way I talk or anything like that, right? Because I think that lends to the relation building between me and my students. So I think being able to exchange strategies with other educators who are doing hip hop based learning is really important for us to create a community around that, because a lot of times we're dealing with institutions that are not necessarily supportive of hip hop based learning. We're dealing with, we're really like on the frontier of education too, right? Because we're building programming that doesn't necessarily look like the programming that exists. So just having that support system, I think, is really important. For me, so much of teaching hip hop in the classroom has been, until more recently, I've been doing it mostly alone, right? So like
mm.
it was really incredible when I started joining like the hip hop ed chat, right? Hashtag hip hop ed, because there's a community of people there who are like, I do this in my classroom, and we talk about different
Ah,
topics, right?
all
And
right.
every week they have a different topic, so it's good to chime in and like learn from people. So I definitely think networking, relationships, exchanging strategies, and also just being there to support each other, especially in terms of what we're coming up against,
Yeah.
right? To just know, okay, this is also strategies of how people deal with not just the classroom, but how they deal with, wanting to push forward on certain kind of pedagogical innovation, introducing different kinds of like learning strategies and content. If you're encountering an administration that maybe is not receptive, right? How do you navigate that? That's
Yeah.
all really, I think, important stuff for teachers who might not have that kind of support. I mean, I have IMOS, like we bounce a lot of stuff off of each other, but
Ugh.
our community is small, so if it could
Right.
Yeah,
grow,
Grow
you
the
know,
community. Yeah.
yeah,
absolutely.
that's always invited.
Yeah. What
Yeah,
was the group you said? Hip hop ed.
Yeah, it's
yeah. Hip hop
hashtag.
ed chat.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Ed.
and
Okay.
I believe, I don't want to, I hope I'm not incorrect, but I believe they talk on Twitter on
Okay.
Tuesday evenings, I believe at 9 p.m.
Oh,
I could
okay.
be
Cool.
wrong, but it's
Uh,
definitely once a week. So it's like people from all over who are familiar with the hashtag who chime in on
Oh,
the
that's
weekly
really
topic.
neat.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna jump. I'm gonna watch that. I'm gonna have to check that out. Man. I need that.
And there's a lot of great stuff that goes on Clubhouse too.
Hmm.
I sometimes like to join those like hip hop ed conversations on
Ah.
Clubhouse. So, and it's just also good to know, like, wow, there's so many people out here doing this. That's also
Yeah.
just
Right.
really good
Yeah.
to know, especially when you're doing the work, and there's not many around you in your own locale who are teaching hip hop, at whatever stage of education. So it's also just good to know, like, wow, there's a whole community all over the world who are doing this work.
Right.
And social media is a great way to connect with all of them.
Yeah. Definitely.
Mhm. Yeah.
Iomas, any thoughts on next steps?
No, I think that for us just to continue this conversation,
Yeah.
and hopefully, like inviting more people to come, because this is good. This conversation has been rich. Just hope it will grow so we can do those things that Dr. Francesca talked about, where we can network and exchange resources and teaching strategies and really support each other.
Yeah.
Because, like she's saying, like you may be alone doing that work, hip hop and education in that work in your own locale, But imagine you may like somebody may be in Cincinnati, but it's somebody in Columbus, and you can get together with each other, and become that
Yeah.
support group for each other. And I know we trying to build that here in Toronto, and just having that cross border, within border connections. I think that's very, very, very important. And
Yeah.
so just building off of this, and this,
Yep.
I just think this was a great idea to have this space and to like engage in this conversation in this
Yeah.
way and keep it going, just to keep it going and be consistent. Yeah.
For sure. And before I forget, shout out to Breeze Brewing. He did text me.
Yeah.
There was a technical difficulties he couldn't get overcome.
No,
So, but he was really appreciative of the conversation and definitely wants to join us the next time we do it.
no,
And
no, no.
want to bring in a few more voices before we go. I almost how'd you pronounce it? Albertia? Is
Yeah, I
that?
think it's
I,
Alberta. Yeah,
I think
yeah,
she said that's right. So
yeah,
she
yeah,
says, I think using hip hop to promote cultural competency in the classroom
yeah,
is a great way to use this content to support teachers and give them
yeah.
appropriate supplements.
Mhm.
Absolutely. I
Well
agree.
said. Well said. And I
Well
like
said.
this. Yafeth comes back with I've always seen MCs as people who are multiple professions, historians, therapists, etc. So I've gravitated to them a lot when I was younger. Of course, it depends on who you're listening to and what they are saying. That is very true. Yes,
Yeah,
very
that's
Yeah,
true.
true.
yeah,
I agree. I think they do have multiple professions in one. I mean, this is what makes them like some of the most important public intellectuals
Yeah.
of the late 20th century. Yeah, and 21st
ag-
century too.
Agreed. Agreed.
and I
Dr.
just,
Friend. Oh yeah, go ahead.
oh no, no,
Mas.
I was just gonna say, just to piggyback off of what YGT said and Dr. Francesca said. I just feel like it's in the tradition of the griot, the African
Yeah.
griot. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like that person had the history and was a poet, and you know what I'm
Right.
saying. Just
Mhm.
it's in that tradition. Like I see MCs as modern day griots. You know what I mean? So yeah, I just wanted to piggyback off of that.
Yeah, totally.
Mhm.
Anything that you need to get off, Dr. Francesca, before we sign off here?
No, not at all. I
Not at
will
all.
say
Okay.
if anyone does want to follow me, I'm on
Yeah.
Twitter at hip hop scholar 82.
At Hip Hop Scholar 82.
You got it.
Got it. I
So
will
I got a
definitely be
question.
following if I
I
don't
got I got a question for you,
already.
Dr. Francesca.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Say somebody was in this conversation, was listening to this conversation, and they're interested in taking your course. Is it a way they could like audit your course? Could they like just audit the course?
Yeah,
Your
sure. I
hip hop
mean,
in
as
okay.
long as I believe if it was online, then it's offered in an online capacity, and they can join
Yeah,
the
yeah.
link, right? So they could connect with me. I'm not
Okay.
teaching it this upcoming term, but I'll teach it again in the summer and in the fall.
Nice.
It obviously becomes a bit more challenging if and when the course goes back into a physical classroom, because we
Right,
are,
right,
of course,
right,
based in
right,
Toronto. But
Right.
as
right.
long as it's online, yeah, I'm
No,
definitely
okay.
open to always people coming into the class. As I mentioned earlier, I like to do a lot of co-teaching, so I try to bring in practitioners, from different eras and different experiences and different geographies. So I'm also open to having people who are actual, who are part of hip hop culture as practitioners. I'm also open to having them into the classroom as well as people who audit it. So yes to that question.
No doubt. No doubt.
There you go. Take a class. It's dope
It's
for
an
sure.
amazing class.
Yes.
It's an amazing class. I'm gonna audit it. I'm gonna take it. I'm gonna do all the
You
papers and
come
everything.
to also teach, so like
True,
kudos to
true,
you
true.
because you come to teach, and every time you come in to teach, the students love you,
Oh,
because I
that's
think it's
all
also
great.
just about your essence, right? So much of teaching is about your essence, who
Mm,
you
Yeah.
are as a person, and your openness and the way that you're receptive to students, and they feel that energy, because hip hop's also about energy.
yeah,
So we're having an exchange of energy, and when the energy is good, we love it and we vibe off of it. When it's not, it's a different story. So
absolutely.
that you feel that in the
You feel
classroom
that
too.
too, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Mm,
definitely. Well, Dr. Francesco, what we have a tradition here at the Boom Bap Chat. It's a hip hop show, so we always give shout outs at the end. So I'll let Iomas give your shout outs. I'll do a few, and then you'll have the last shout outs of the night. Does that sound good?
Sounds good.
All right. All right, Omar, so you want to shout out tonight, man?
Man, want to shout out my Boom Bap Chat brothers, MC Till, Profound, Stowe, Bo, Joe November. Want to shout out uh, Dr. Francesca for being in the place to
Yes.
be. My sis, yeah, I'm so excited she was able to come through tonight and just add on to the cipher. So much knowledge, wisdom, and understanding that she brings to any space that she enters. I'm just amazed. I could sit and listen to her talk all day. He'll say so. Shout out to Dr. Francesca. Shout out to Breeze Brewing. You know what I mean? Look up to him too. And just my wife, city of Toronto, Chicago, Cincinnati, Detroit, my family in the D. And shout out to Profound who couldn't make it tonight. You know what I'm saying? So, man, that's it for me, man. And I'm out. See y'all next week. And shout out to all the people that was in the chat. Chris,
Yeah.
YGT, Albertia, Gloria, Tyrone. Who else was in there? Chris, I think I said Chris already. Man, shout out to y'all for taking the time to add on to the conversation as well. So much respect, love, man, to everybody.
Dope. Thank you, Almas. Piggybacking off of that, definitely big shout out to Breeze Brewing, who, if you're not tuned in right now, he was on at the very beginning, and he'll be back the next time we do this. We'll definitely invite him back. Shout out to all the educators out there, whether you're into hip hop or not, you're in there engaging with young people, and that's just a beautiful thing. And shout out to all the educators that have come through the Boom Bap Chat, Jay Rawls and John Robinson, and so many more. Wordsworth, we've had several substantial, Grab Lover. We've had a lot of educators come through, and we appreciate what you do. And last but not least, just big shout out to Dr. Francesca for all that you're doing for the people that come to your class. Just really appreciate you and what you do. And thanks for being here too. It's a pleasure to meet you, and can't wait to have you back and do it again. So
Thank you.
yeah. And on that note, you can take it away and give any shout outs you want, and then we'll be out of here.
Well, shout out to both of you for having me. I've watched before, so I'm a fan.
Yeah.
I've been watching from a distance, so thank you to both of you for inviting me and for also creating a space like this to just discuss also education. Because a lot of times when we talk about hip hop, we talk about the more, like popular, the popular conversations that we want to have about hip hop, which is the crafts, right, that they're associated with. So thank you for creating this space. Shout out to all of those who joined in the chat and for sharing your comments and your perspectives, because I think it's really important when we dialogue to just have an exchange of ideas and to be open to that and to conversate around that. Also, I'll close by saying shout out to my students, especially the recent round of Soch 3755, who honestly transformed my life as a teacher. And really and truly, it was I've been teaching for over 10 years now, and I've never had a class like them. They really just, I think one of the things that I've told my students a lot of times is that, at the end of the term, you always get these emails like, this class is amazing, transform my life. And I don't think students hear enough that they do that for us too.
That's
They
cool.
really build and grow us in ways that help us sustain and extend our practice, but also help us become, if we're really open to what education can do for us, all of us, they really help us become better people. So thank you to my students. I love you dearly.
No doubt.
And on that note, we say peace.